Hello, Namaskar, and welcome to the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. A recent news item that 100 tons of Indian gold has been shipped back to India from England has caught the attention of a lot of people because the reasons or the real reasons why this gold has come back to India are not particularly known. The Reserve Bank of India, that is the RBI, has not particularly given a reason why this gold has been brought back to India. And I'm also asking the question which I'm asking in my podcast is that why has this gold come back to India on the eve of the declaration of results of the 2024 general elections? Why, at this particular point in time, what was the urgent need to bring back this 100 tons of gold? And 100 tons, by the way, is a huge amount of gold. It's a huge amount of money. Why all this has come back to India? And as a lot of you might be knowing, that a lot of the gold reserves not only from India but from all over the world are kept in the Bank of England, but we have pulled out 100 tons, which is no small number. So why now? I'm going to answer that question because, as I said, there is no official announcement regarding this particular transfer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the pieces. I'm going to join various developments and try and find a cogent reason why this gold has come back to India. Let me start by making a statement which, as I said, is based on my own intellectual assessment. This statement, I'm giving the caveat, there is no official statement why this gold has come back, but this is again, as I said, I'm joining the pieces and I'm giving you my own interpretation of why this gold has come back. My simple assertion is that this 100 tons of gold has come back to India because of fear of sanctions. Now hold your breath. I have to explain what I mean by that, but you'll have to bear with me. I will give you that explanation in a little short time. But first, I will take you back in history and tell you of another very interesting fact regarding gold reserves, regarding another transfer which had taken place many years back. I'll put that in context with this new development, and then I will explain to you what I mean by fear of sanctions. So I'm talking of the time of the 1990s when the economic situation in India was perilous. It was really bad. Our forex, that is, the foreign reserves, had fallen to record lows. And at that time, the forex reserves were only about 5.8 billion as compared to almost $642 billion which we have today. We were that low in 1990s. We were in the danger of defaulting our loans, etc. And at that time, this is something very interesting, nearly 70 tons of gold, which had raised almost $400 million, that to avoid default by the Indian government, that particular gold was shipped back to England, to the Bank of England, to keep as a kind of a surety, to kind of reassure our creditors that we were not going to default. So the opposite of what has happened today had happened back in the 1990s when our forex levels had fallen to new lows. And very interestingly, the government at that time was the Congress government, and Dr. Manmohan Singh was, of course, the finance minister. And now, in 2024, when our economic situation is actually very healthy, quite rosy, we have, as I said, forex reserves of almost $642 billion. The opposite has happened, that these gold reserves have been shipped back to India. And so the question that really we should be asking is, why now? I think what has really happened is that a recent report, and some mention of that report has been made in some television channels also, that as soon as the results are declared on the 4th of June, almost a conglomerate, almost a grouping, almost a collection of 120 powerful NGOs, NGOs in India, they will gang up. And obviously, these NGOs are not simple NGOs. These are NGOs which are backed by foreign powers, especially some Western powers who have inimical designs on India. These NGOs are going to launch civil and unrest on various kinds of issues, spread chaos and anarchy in the country, and the government, senior bureaucrats in the government, the political leadership, the current dispensation, they are quite worried at what could happen. And I have a feeling that this transfer of gold is linked to this impending civil unrest which could hit India very, very soon. You don't even have to wait very long for that. So that probably is one big factor which the government took into account when it pulled out its reserves from India. I mentioned to you sanctions. What do I mean by sanctions out here? Now, it's an open secret. There is no hiding the fact that during these 2024 elections, certain Western governments were extremely uncomfortable with the idea of Modi 3.0, of Modi coming back to power, and they had probably gone all out to aid, to help, to maybe even transfer funds. I have no knowledge of that, but these are the stories which are in circulation, so that as to undermine the prospects of Modi 3.0. And the fact also is that the government is aware of it. The government has probably downplayed it a little bit. Some mention has been made by the Prime Minister, but the government is aware that foreign forces were peddling, were mudding their hands in troubled waters, and therefore they were trying to influence the course of elections. Which means that it's not that after June 4th all this is going to stop, as some people had originally thought, that maybe these games are being played, and now that there is almost a near certainty that Modi 3.0 is actually going to happen, that these foreign powers will back off. Far from it. It seems that after June 4th, some civil unrest on a wide scale could probably be launched in India. The government is worried about that. And therefore, keeping that in mind, a couple of other developments could happen in the course of time. India, of course, would react to it, which means there could be a clampdown, which means that the government would take strict action against the NGOs. And this is precisely what these governments are looking for, and on the pretext that India is crushing democracy or the right to free speech or liberties, Western governments could impose sanctions on India. And the next thing which could follow, as I said, this is all I'm putting together and I'm joining the dots out here. There is no official announcement in it, so I'm giving this caveat again and again. And after these sanctions, what could also happen is that Indian assets abroad could be seized by these governments. Yeah, it's a shocker of a statement, but there is a probability that if sanctions happen, then after sanctions, Indian assets abroad could be seized to kind of teach the Indian government a lesson, as it were. The second thing which has also happened is that, as I said, the Bank of England has been through all the years in the international trading system. When we are talking of reserve currencies, we are talking of the international monetary system and all that. The Bank of England is a very trusted place. It's a very viable place to keep your assets for, especially gold. Most countries in the world do that. But now, in this current overcharged political environment, in a world which is completely polarized today, even the Bank of England can no longer be trusted. And that is why the government post has pulled out these 100 tons of gold from the Bank of England, and they are coming, and they are back in India. And this is not some empty, idle joining of the dots. there has been another major development which is already occurring, which is happening right in front of our eyes, which we have to take cognizance of. We have to take note of this development, because if this can happen to one particular country, it can happen to us also. And who am I referring to? I'm obviously referring to Russia. A lot of assets of Russia are being seized today by Western governments on the pretext that these assets would be then sold off and the money and the proceeds would go to the Ukrainian government. If that can happen to Russia, then probably if India is designated as a hostile country, as a country which encourages or clamps down rather on democratic or on free speech, as the West would like to say, then what is to say that some of our assets will not be seized in the future? And the government is probably aware of this danger. And also, just to tell you that I am not fear mongering out here, something like this has already happened 2 years back. And I will take you back to 2022 when something on these lines had occurred. And what am I referring to? I'm referring to the fact when this entire this Devas multimedia case was going on. And at that time, if people have forgotten, then I need to refresh their memories. A Canadian court had ordered the seizure of assets of Air India. Those assets were to be sold off and $30 million were to be recovered. And that's the problem with Western governments. Because when Western governments then set on this path, then it's not only the government or the NGOs, but even the courts, they fall into line, even other branches. The press obviously is, at the moment, the Western press, we all know, is very hostile to India. There is no question about that. So there's already a precedence where the Canadian court has ordered the seizure of Air India assets. And if it can happen then 2 years back, why can't it happen today? Why can't it happen in the future as we go along? And the Indian government is completely aware, is cognizant of this fact. And maybe this step has been taken to counter any such move that our assets are unilaterally seized by Western government. Another factor which we have to keep into mind: the International Court of Justice is also playing a role or becoming a handmaiden of Western governments. A kind of a verdict which the Western governments wants, the International Court of Justice steps in, whether we are talking of the Israel-Gaza conflict, whether we are talking of the Russia-Ukraine war, or so many other issues which are going on in the world. And what is to stop tomorrow, even though I don't think so we subscribe to the International Court of Justice rulings, but what is to stop the International Court of Justice on some plea that is by anti-national, anti-Indian forces, some plea which is put in the courts and all that, and they ask the ICJ to take action against India. And the ICJ passes strictures against not only the Indian government, but Indian leaders, for instance, maybe even the Prime Minister, who knows. All that is a possibility in the future, because things are, as I said, very polarized at the moment. They are, things are really going downhill very, very fast. And that's a big point which I'm making, is that today the danger of a third world war is actually no longer talk or theory. It is now becoming very, very real. And that development has taken place because, as maybe if you are not aware of it, you should be aware of the fact that Western governments are already giving their go-ahead for Western, that is for especially for American missiles, long-range missiles that the Ukrainians can launch, which translated means that actually the Western powers will be launching those missiles. These missiles will go deep inside Russian territory, ostensibly to hit military target, but who knows, if this happens, they could hit civilian target also. And then you can imagine the scenario: Russia will obviously respond, and then the prospects of a third world war. And therefore, the Indian government is pulling out its valuable assets like gold, because they see that Europe could turn into battleground Europe not very far away. That's a real possibility now. We have to contend with that, and therefore valuable assets are being pulled out of Europe as fast as possible. And the last point, why I am giving you this particular theory, why I'm connecting the dots and I'm giving you this particular argument is that by all accounts, it seems that Rishi Sunak, his term is, well, he's already resigned in the Senate, and the process has started for the next general elections in the UK, which will be held in July 4th, I think, in the United Kingdom. But by all probability, it seems that Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are on their way out, and the Labour government will come to power. The lead is so huge now that it is very difficult for the Conservatives to make it up. Now, the Indian government, they're not saying it, but the fact is they're very uncomfortable with the Labour government. The Labour government we know for long. And don't forget one more thing, that the president leader of the Labour government, that is Keir Starmer, he actually has had his schooling he's got his tutelage under Corbyn, which everybody knows was extremely hostile to India. A lot of the Mirpuri section, Mirpuri is of course this place in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. A lot of Kashmiri Mirpuris are in London, in England. They have a huge influence on the Labour Party, and they obviously don't want to see good relations with India, and they will obviously extract their pound of flesh when the Labour government comes. The government of India is aware of all these facts, and therefore now to keep your assets in the Bank of England in a scenario where the Labour government will be in power after July is fraught with danger. And the government does not want to take that danger. And that's another reason why the government is pulling out the gold. It is pulling out its assets from the United Kingdom. And it's not only the United Kingdom. The danger now is enveloping entire Europe for that matter. And we'll have to again see, even in the US, what happens in the US, because troubled times are, it's there in the US also. Especially now after the recent conviction of Donald Trump. And the fact is that the judge will announce some kind of a sentence or whatever. This is not going to just completely polarize the electorate in the United States. And how do the US respond to these developments? How will the US respond to what's happening to Europe? That again remains to be seen. So that again is a huge amount of uncertainty for us. Vis-a-vis the US, who will be good for us? It's not clear-cut at all, whether it's Biden, Trump, neither of them. All these answers are not very clear at the moment. So in this entire climate of uncertainty, polarization, war rhetoric, which could, this war could actually, a hot war could land not at the doorstep of Europe, it's already at the doorstep of Europe, but it could land right bang in the middle of Europe. All these developments could take place, and in such a scenario, I think the government is thinking prudently. We are pulling out our assets from these places. We are not ringing the alarm bells as yet. It's a wait and watch situation, but this first move has already been made by the government of India. 100 tons of gold is not a small amount. It's a huge amount of money which has come back to India, and we'll have to, again, as I keep saying, my favorite line is we have to watch this space. Let's see what happens, what all new developments which happen in this space. But right now the prognosis is not very good, and we have to keep a very close watch on it. And the first sign of trouble, or the fact that Western powers can gang up and trouble India, we just have to be prepared to fend ourselves and certainly not let our assets fall into hostile hands, as it happened in the time, so much long time back, during the time of the East India Company, and how these companies and how these power centers, they took over our country. That lesson has been learned, and hopefully that will never be repeated again in India. And therefore we are on guard. And to my mind, the first step has already been taken, where we protect ourselves and we bring our assets back home. And so on this note, I come to the end of this episode of the CAA Show. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Do subscribe to the show. Push that red button on your laptop screen. Subscribe to us. Subscription is, of course, completely free. And we bring you all the hot button issues of the day with a twist, with new ideas. And that's the forte, that is the strength of the CAA show. Until next time, then, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.